The clock struck midnight at Joey's diner, where the scent of fresh coffee mixed with the lingering aroma of grilled onions and toast. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a peaceful backdrop for the few late-night customers scattered across worn leather booths. Behind the counter, Mai wiped down the coffee machine, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered to the melody that had been stuck in her head all week. She'd been working the night shift at Joey's for nearly 10 years now, watching life unfold through the steamy diner windows. The regulars knew her as the quiet waitress with a gentle smile who remembered their usual orders and always made sure their coffee cup stayed full. What they didn't know was that her hands, now rough from countless dishes and hot plates, once danced across piano keys in concert halls. Tonight was slower than usual. A couple of truck drivers dozed in their corner booth, their half-empty plates pushed aside. An old man in a worn jacket nursed his third cup of decaf while solving a crossword puzzle. Mai found herself humming softly as she organized the sugar packets, her voice carrying the notes of a tune she'd composed in her head during countless quiet nights like this one. The bell of the door chimed, and a man in an expensive but rumpled suit stumbled in, looking exhausted. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his eyes had the glazed look of someone who'd been staring at screens for far too long. "Just coffee, please," he mumbled, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Mai poured him a fresh cup, still humming absently. The man's head tilted slightly, his fingers pausing around the warm mug. Something in her melody had caught his attention, though Mai remained unaware, lost in her own world of music and memories. As she moved down the counter, wiping away coffee rings and crumbs, her mind drifted to the upright piano sitting in her small apartment. It had belonged to her grandmother, who'd saved for years to buy it. The piano was old now, slightly out of tune, but it was her most precious possession. Every morning, after her shift ended, Mai would play for an hour before sleep, her fingers remembering the path across the keys even as the rest of the world drifted toward dawn. The man at the counter watched her with growing interest as she continued to hum, the melody growing more complex. He pulled out his phone and began typing quickly, but Mai didn't notice. She was thinking about her last audition, 15 years ago, when stage fright had frozen her fingers and shattered her dreams of studying at the prestigious music academy. Her grandmother had held her while she cried that day, whispering that sometimes life had its own timing. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead, adding its own note to Mai's unconscious symphony. The sound of spoons stirring coffee, the soft murmur of late-night conversations, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Over the years, these had become her orchestra. Without realizing it, she'd been composing a different kind of music, one born from the simple beauty of ordinary moments. A small group of college students burst through the door, laughing and shaking off the rain. Mai tucked her melody away, reaching for her notepad with a warm smile. But the man in the rumpled suit had already pulled out his business card, turning it over in his fingers thoughtfully. He was one of the city's most respected music producers, though Mai wouldn't know that until much later. For now, she was simply doing what she'd done countless nights before, serving coffee, clearing tables, and letting the music in her heart keep her company through the quiet hours before dawn. Little did she know that this ordinary night was about to become the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would prove her grandmother's words true. Sometimes life does have its own perfect timing. The sun was just beginning to rise as Mai unlocked the door to her small apartment, her feet aching from the long night shift. The morning light crept through her curtains, casting a gentle glow on her grandmother's old piano. Its dark wood was worn smooth with age, each scratch and mark telling a story of the hands that had played it over the years. She set down her bag and jacket, drawn to the piano like a magnet. Even after a tiring shift, the urge to play was stronger than her need for sleep. Her mother was still asleep in the next room. The thin walls meant Mai had gotten creative about practicing. She placed an old quilt inside the piano to muffle the sound, and she played with the gentlest touch she could manage. As her fingers touched the cool keys, The melody that had been floating through her head all night at the diner finally found its voice. It started soft, like rain on a window pane, then grew into something more, a song about late-night coffee refills and kind words exchanged over steaming mugs. Without realizing it, Mai had begun turning her everyday life into music. The sunlight grew stronger as she played, but she barely noticed. The song pulled her along, each note flowing naturally into the next. It wasn't the strict classical pieces she practiced in her youth. This was something different, something that belonged purely to her. The sound of sizzling griddles, clinking plates, and midnight conversations had woven themselves into her music, creating a melody that felt like home. A soft creak of floorboards made her pause. Her mother stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane, a warm smile on her tired face. "Don't stop," she whispered, easing herself into the old armchair near the piano. "I haven't heard you play like that in years." Mi's hands hesitated over the keys. Her mother had always supported her music, working extra hours at the tailoring shop to pay for piano lessons when Mai was young. But after the failed audition, after choosing the steady income of waitressing over the uncertainty of a music career, something had changed. The piano had become a reminder of what could have been. "It's just something I've been thinking about," Mai said softly, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them. "Nothing serious." Her mother's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Music is always serious when it comes from the heart. Your grandmother used to say that." The mention of her grandmother brought back a rush of memories. Afternoon lessons, warm hands guiding her fingers over the keys, the smell of jasmine tea and fresh-baked cookies. Her grandmother had never pressured her to perform or compete. "Music," she would say, "is like breathing. We do it to live, not to impress." One of the regular customers from the diner, a kind-hearted college student who always ordered chocolate chip pancakes, had noticed Mai playing during her break last week. She hadn't realized he filmed her on his phone, filming her calloused hands moving across the keys while still wearing her waitress uniform, her name tag catching the diner's fluorescent light. The morning grew warmer, and the sounds of the city waking up drifted through the window. A bus rumbled past, a dog barked, and somewhere nearby, a radio played the morning news. But in Mi's small apartment, time seemed to stand still as she began to play again, this time letting the music flow freely, without fear or hesitation. Her mother closed her eyes, swaying slightly in her chair. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, the student's video was beginning its journey across the internet, touching hearts and opening doors they never imagined possible. For now, it was just a mother and daughter sharing a peaceful morning, wrapped in the gentle embrace of music and memories. Life at Joey's Diner continued as usual that week, or so Mai thought. She served plates of steaming eggs and hash browns, topped off coffee cups, and hummed her melodies while wiping down tables. But something had changed in the world outside the diner's worn leather booths and neon signs. The video that the college student had taken was spreading across the internet like wildfire. It showed Mai during her break, sitting at the old upright piano in the diner's corner. A piano that had been gathering dust until she'd asked permission to tune it. In the video, she was still wearing her blue uniform, her name tag slightly crooked, her hands moving across the keys with a grace that seemed to transform the humble diner into a concert hall. People were captivated by the contrast, a waitress in a late-night diner playing music that could touch souls. The comments beneath the video told stories of their own. "This reminded me of my own forgotten dreams," wrote one viewer. "The way she plays makes me feel less alone," shared another. The number of views kept climbing, but Mai remained unaware, her phone tucked away in her locker during shifts, its notifications piling up unread. The regular customers started acting differently, though. They lingered longer over their meals, watching her with new eyes. Some requested songs during her breaks, and the piano in the corner became a gathering spot. The old man who always ordered decaf began leaving music sheets on the counter, yellowed pages from his own collection that he thought she might enjoy. One busy evening, A local news van parked outside the diner. Maya was in the kitchen when she heard the excited whispers from her coworkers. The reporter wanted to interview her to hear the story behind the viral video. At first, Mi's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped a pot of coffee. But Mrs. Lee, the diner's owner, squeezed her shoulder gently and said, "Your music has been bringing joy to my customers for years. Maybe it's time to share it with more people." The interview was simple and honest. Mai talked about her grandmother's piano, about the ways music had always been her quiet companion through long nights and early mornings. She spoke about finding beauty in everyday moments, in the rhythm of city buses, in the melody of rain on windows, in the harmony of conversations over coffee and pie. That night, after the news crew left, something magical happened. The diner filled with people from all walks of life. A young girl brought her violin, an elderly man arrived with his harmonica, and soon Joey's diner became an impromptu concert hall. May played her songs while others joined in, creating a symphony of shared dreams and simple joys. Among the crowd, unnoticed at first, sat the man in the rumpled suit from that fateful night, the music producer. He watched as Mai played, saw how she brought people together with her music, how she transformed an ordinary diner into a place of magic. He understood now that what he'd heard that night wasn't just a melody, it was the sound of genuine passion, of dreams kept alive through years of patient waiting. As the evening drew to a close, Mi's mother arrived, supported by her cane, but beaming with pride. She carried a small box that made May's eyes fill with tears. Her grandmother's old music notebooks, filled with handwritten songs and gentle encouragements in the margins. "Your grandmother always said music finds its moment," her mother whispered. "Maybe this is yours." The producer waited until the crowd thinned before approaching May. In his hands, he held not just a business card this time, but a proposal, an opportunity to record her music, to share her diner symphonies with the world. But what touched May most wasn't the offer itself. It was the way he spoke about her music, understanding that these weren't just songs, but stories of resilience, of dreams kept safe through years of serving coffee and cleaning tables. That night, as Mai locked up the diner, the neon sign cast a warm glow over the empty street. Her songs had always been about finding beauty in ordinary moments, and now, somehow, those ordinary moments had led her to something extraordinary. The producer's business card sat on Mi's kitchen table for 3 days, its elegant lettering catching the morning light while she made tea. The opportunity it represented felt both thrilling and terrifying. Recording her music professionally meant stepping away from the safe routine she'd built over the past decade, the familiar rhythm of the diner, the regular customers who'd become like family, the steady income that helped care for her mother. Her mother noticed her distraction during their shared breakfast. "You're stirring that tea like it holds all the answers," she said gently, reaching across to stop May's spinning spoon. "Tell me what's troubling you." Mai looked at her mother's hands, weathered from years of careful stitching at the tailoring shop. "If I do this, if I try to make music my life, what if I fail again? And how would we manage? Your medical bills, the rent." Her mother's eyes crinkled with understanding. "When your father left, everyone told me to give up the tailoring shop, to find something more stable. But I kept at it because it made my heart sing. That shop put you through school, bought your grandmother's piano, and kept a roof over our heads. Sometimes the risky path is the right one." At work that evening, the diner hummed with its usual energy, but everything felt different. Each regular customer seemed to have an opinion about her opportunity. Mr. Chen, who'd been coming in for the midnight special for 8 years, shared how his own daughter had recently opened a bakery after 15 years as an office worker. "She was scared too," he said, stirring his coffee. "But fear and courage often hold hands." The next morning, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Lee, the diner's owner, called Mai into her tiny office. The walls were covered with faded photographs of the diner through the years. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a newer picture. Mai at the piano, surrounded by smiling customers during that magical night when the diner had turned into an impromptu concert hall. Your music has brought something special to this place, Mrs. Lee continued. I want you to know that whatever you decide, your job will be here. Maybe not full-time, but enough shifts to keep you steady while you chase this dream. We take care of our own here. That afternoon, May's phone buzzed with a message from the college student who'd first shared her video. The diner's regular customers had started an online fundraising page to help cover her mother's medical expenses for the next 6 months. Your music gave us so much joy, the message read. Let us help give you some peace of mind. Tears blurred Mi's vision as she read the growing list of contributors, the truck drivers who always tipped generously, the night shift nurses who came in for early morning breakfast, the young artists who sketched in corner booths. Each small donation carried a message of encouragement, a piece of their own stories. That evening, Mai sat at her grandmother's piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The setting sun painted her small apartment in shades of gold, and through the open window, she could hear the city's evening symphony, car horns, children's laughter, the distant rumble of trains. All these sounds had found their way into her music over the years. She began to play, and this time a new melody emerged, one that spoke of fear and hope dancing together, of dreams preserved through years of patient waiting, of the strength found in a community's love. Her mother appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane, listening with tears in her eyes. Your grandmother used to say that music isn't just about making beautiful sounds, her mother said softly. It's about having the courage to share your heart with the world. Later that night, Mai finally picked up the producer's business card and dialed the number. Her hands were steady now, her heart full of a quiet certainty. She realized that this wasn't just her journey anymore. It belonged to everyone who had believed in her music, who had kept her dream alive through all those nights of serving coffee and clearing tables. As the phone rang, she glanced at her waitress uniform hanging on the door, ready for tomorrow's shift. Whatever happened next, she knew that every step of her path, every coffee stain, every late-night conversation, every quiet moment at the piano, had led her exactly where she needed to be. The recording studio was nothing like Mai had imagined. Instead of the cold, intimidating space she'd feared, it felt warm and lived in, with old concert posters on the walls and a collection of mismatched mugs in the tiny kitchen. The grand piano in the recording room reminded her of a sleeping giant, its polished surface catching the morning light. Play it like you do at the diner, the producer encouraged, adjusting his headphones. Just tell your story. May closed her eyes, thinking of countless nights at Joey's, of coffee cups clinking and quiet conversations, of rain on windows and city buses rumbling past. Her fingers found the keys and the music began to flow. But something felt missing. The notes were perfect, but they didn't carry the same magic as they did in the diner. After several attempts, May gathered her courage and shared an unusual idea with the producer. The sounds of the diner, they're part of the music. Could we somehow include them? The next evening, they set up recording equipment at Joey's during her regular shift. The producer was fascinated by the symphony of everyday life, the sizzle of the grill, the gentle clink of spoons stirring coffee, the squeak of the old front door, the murmur of late-night conversations. These familiar sounds became the heartbeat of May's album, which they decided to call Midnight Symphony. Between recording sessions, May still worked a few shifts at the diner. Her regular customers became invested in her journey, offering encouragement and asking to hear snippets of the new songs. Mr. Chen brought his old wind chimes one night, their gentle tinkling adding another layer to one of her compositions. The night shift nurses harmonized softly while she played, their voices becoming part of the recording. Her mother's health took an unexpected turn during the recording process. Mai spent long hours at the hospital, her worried heart finding its way into a new piece she called Waiting Room Prayers. She played it for her mother on her phone, the gentle melody bringing peace to the sterile hospital room. The nurses would stop in the doorway to listen, and soon they asked for copies to play for other patients. One morning, as dawn broke over the city, Mai sat at the studio's grand piano, working on the final piece for the album. She thought about how far she'd come from that first night when the producer walked into the diner. Her hands, still carrying the marks of years of waitressing, moved across the keys with newfound confidence. This last song wasn't just about her journey. It was a thank you letter to everyone who had helped her along the way. The producer sat in the control room, eyes closed, listening. When Mai finished playing, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "in all my years in this business, I've never heard anyone make ordinary life sound so extraordinary." That evening at the diner, Mai shared the rough cut of the album with Mrs. Lee and the staff after closing time. They sat in the booths, drinking tea, and listening to the familiar sounds of their workplace transformed into something magical. The night cook wiped away tears when he heard the rhythm of his spatula on the grill woven into one of the melodies. Her mother listened to the album in her hospital room, a proud smile on her tired face. "I hear everything in this music," she said softly. "I hear your grandmother's lessons, your years of hard work, your kindness to others. Most of all, I hear love." As the final mixing sessions approached, May realized that this album had become more than just a collection of songs. It was a celebration of perseverance, a testimony to the beauty found in everyday moments, and a reminder that dreams don't expire. They just wait for the right moment to bloom. The last track on the album included a special surprise, a recording of the diner's bell chiming as the door opened, followed by the voices of her regular customers calling out their usual greetings. Because in the end, this wasn't just Mi's music. It was the sound of a community, of dreams shared over countless cups of coffee, of hope kept alive one note at a time. The morning of May's first public concert arrived with a gentle rain tapping against Joey's diner's windows. The familiar space had been transformed overnight. The regular tables rearranged to create rows of seating, soft lighting installed to replace the usual fluorescent glare, and her grandmother's restored piano placed carefully where booth 7 used to be. The producer had suggested fancy venues downtown, but May knew this was where her music belonged. The diner that had been her shelter through years of quiet dreams would now become her concert hall. Mrs. Lee had closed the diner for the entire day, something she hadn't done in 15 years of ownership. Mai arrived early, wearing a simple blue dress that echoed the color of her waitress uniform. Her hands trembled slightly as she made herself a cup of tea in the kitchen where she'd worked countless shifts. The wall clock ticked steadily, counting down the hours until the evening's performance. The staff arrived first, setting up chairs and helping the sound technicians. The night cook brought homemade cookies, arranging them on trays just like they did for the regular customers. Through the window, Mai could see a line forming outside, not just critics and music industry people, but familiar faces from the neighborhood. Her mother arrived next, looking stronger after her hospital stay. She sat in the front row, exactly where booth 3 used to be. "I brought something," she said, pulling out a worn photo album. Inside was a picture of young May at her grandmother's piano, small fingers stretched across the keys, face bright with concentration. "You had the same look then as you do now. Like music is the most natural thing in the world." As the diner filled with people, the nervous flutter in Mi's stomach began to settle. She recognized the regulars, Mr. Chen with his grandchildren, the night shift nurses still in their scrubs, the college student who'd first shared her video. They weren't just an audience. They were the people who'd witnessed her journey, one coffee cup at a time. The producer had arranged for the concert to be live-streamed, and a small camera crew set up their equipment discreetly. "There are people watching from all over the world," he told her, "but just play like it's another night at the diner." As the lights dimmed, Mai took her place at the piano. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pies still lingered in the air. She looked out at the faces before her. Some she'd served breakfast to for years, others she'd never met, but who had found something of their own dreams in her music. She began to play. The first notes of Midnight Symphony filled the space, accompanied by the recorded sounds of the diner, the gentle clink of cups, the murmur of voices, the distant rumble of city life. The audience sat in rapt silence, many with tears in their eyes as they recognized their own voices woven into the melody. Between songs, Mai shared small stories about the regular who'd inspired certain melodies, about nights spent composing while the city slept, about her grandmother's belief that music was a way of holding hands across time. The diner's walls seemed to hold these stories, adding their own warmth to each note. When she played waiting room prayers, her mother closed her eyes, swaying gently. The piece had changed since its creation in the hospital. It still carried worry and fear, but now it sang of healing and hope as well. For her final song, May invited everyone to join in. The night shift nurses hummed the melody they'd helped create. Mr. Chen's wind chimes tinkled softly from where they now hung permanently by the window, and even the producer found himself swaying to the rhythm of this unexpected symphony. As the last notes faded, the applause that filled the diner wasn't just for the music. It was for every dream that had waited patiently for its moment, for every person who'd ever held onto hope through long nights and quiet mornings. Music critics would later write about the unique beauty of a concert held in a diner, but they couldn't fully capture the magic of that evening, the way it felt like both an ending and a beginning, a homecoming and a setting forth. 1 year had passed since that magical first concert at Joey's Diner. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows as Mai arranged chairs around the piano, preparing for her weekly music class. The diner had changed. A beautiful baby grand piano now stood permanently in the corner, donated by a local music shop that had been touched by her story. But the heart of the place remained the same. She still worked the occasional night shift, wearing her blue uniform with pride. "Why keep waitressing when your album is doing so well?" people would ask. Mai would smile and tell them that some of her best melodies still came to her while refilling coffee cups and chatting with customers at 3 a.m. The success of Midnight Symphony had opened doors she'd never imagined. She performed in concert halls across the country, but her favorite venues were always the small diners and cafes where she could see every face in the crowd, where the smell of coffee and pie mixed with the music. Her mother, now fully recovered, often traveled with her, beaming with pride from the front row. But Mi's greatest joy came from the music foundation she'd started. Every Sunday morning, before the diner opened for business, she taught free music lessons to other service workers who harbored musical dreams of their own. The young dishwasher from the Italian restaurant down the street was discovering his talent for jazz. A retired bus driver was finally learning to play the songs his mother had taught him decades ago. Music doesn't care what uniform you wear, she'd tell her students as they gathered around the piano. It only cares about what's in your heart. The producer, who still dropped by for coffee and inspiration, helped arrange small performances for her students at local venues. The community center 2 blocks away had become a second home for her growing musical family. With help from local businesses and music lovers, they'd converted an old storage room into a practice space. The walls were lined with donated instruments, each one carrying its own story of dreams passed forward. On this particular morning, as her students filed into the diner, Mai noticed a new face. A young waitress from the breakfast place across town, clutching sheet music with coffee-stained hands. "I've been watching your videos," she said shyly. "I used to play violin, before life got busy with work and bills." Mai recognized that look, the same one she'd worn for so many years, hope and doubt dancing together. She patted the piano bench beside her. "Let's hear what music you've been keeping in your heart." The regulars had grown used to the Sunday morning symphony. Mr. Chen would arrive early, ordering his usual breakfast and becoming an unofficial cheerleader for the students. The night shift nurses would stop by after their rounds, adding their harmonies to the practice sessions. Even Mrs. Lee had started taking guitar lessons, saying it was never too late to add new dreams to old ones. That evening, after her students had gone home, Mai sat at the piano in the quiet diner. Her grandmother's photo smiled down from its place of honor on the wall, next to the framed article about the diner's transformation into a community music hub. The keys under her fingers were smooth with use, loved by many hands now, not just her own. A new melody was taking shape in her mind, one about dreams that grow too big for one heart to hold, about the joy of passing hope from hand to hand like a precious gift. Outside, the city hummed its eternal song of traffic and footsteps, of laughter and life carrying on. Inside, the diner had become more than just a place to serve coffee and pie. It was a place where music and dreams found their way home. As she played, May thought about all the twists and turns that had led her here. The long nights of serving coffee hadn't been a detour from her dreams. They had been part of the journey, teaching her that every life has its own unique rhythm, its own perfect timing. Her music now carried all of these stories, all of these lives, woven together into something bigger than she ever imagined. The bell above the door chimed as the first customers of the evening shift arrived. Mai smiled, her hands still moving across the keys. She had found her way back to music, yes, but more importantly, she had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful symphonies are created not on grand stages, but in the quiet moments between serving coffee and daring to dream.